In the pre-dawn hours of June 22, 2025, America took action against Iran. President Trump authorized targeted airstrikes against Iran's nuclear facilities. The world awoke to news that the U.S. had bombed the Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear facilities. This escalation has plunged U.S.-Iran relations to their lowest point in decades. The operation was a clear demonstration of American military superiority. The international community is waiting for Iran's response. How will Iran retaliate? The potential for a full-scale war is now dangerously high. The decision to launch military strikes was the culmination of escalating tensions and failed diplomatic efforts. The White House had given Iran a final warning to cease nuclear development, but Iran remained defiant. Tehran was given an ultimatum: halt uranium enrichment and allow international inspections. The deadline passed with no compliance. Iran publicly rejected the ultimatum. Intelligence suggested Iran was preparing to reactivate advanced centrifuges. Evidence emerged that Iran had begun enriching uranium to a higher purity. The White House interpreted this as a step toward weaponization. The strikes were cast as enforcement after failed diplomacy. The action demonstrated the U.S. would not permit Iran to become a nuclear-armed state. The ultimatum's breach became the justification for war. A central justification for the timing of the strikes was the concept of breakout time, the estimated period it would take for Iran to produce enough weapons-grade uranium for one nuclear bomb. In the weeks leading up to the attack, U.S. and Israeli intelligence agencies presented President Trump with alarming new assessments. These reports claimed that Iran's breakout time had shrunk dramatically. Officials warned that Iran was no longer years or even many months away from this critical threshold. Instead, the window had narrowed to a matter of weeks or months, creating an urgent and unacceptable threat. This accelerated timeline fundamentally changed the strategic calculation for the Trump administration. The White House argued that waiting any longer would mean risking a scenario where it would be too late to act. The fear was that a nuclear-capable Iran would irrevocably alter the balance of power in the Middle East, embolden its proxies like Hezbollah and the Houthis, and potentially spark a regional nuclear arms race as countries like Saudi Arabia and Turkey sought to develop their own deterrence. The strikes were therefore presented as a preemptive measure designed to slam the brakes on Iran's progress before it crossed a point of no return. The intelligence that prompted this urgency was reportedly gathered through satellite surveillance, communications intercepts, and human sources on the ground, some of which were allegedly provided by Israeli intelligence services. These sources painted a picture of an Iranian program operating at a pace far quicker than publicly understood. They pointed to hidden workshops and undeclared enrichment activities that suggested a covert parallel program running alongside the one monitored by the IAEA. For President Trump, this intelligence confirmed his long-held suspicion that Iran could not be trusted. This narrative of a rapidly closing window of opportunity was crucial in building the case for military action. It transformed the debate from a question of if action was needed to when. By framing the situation as a race against time, the administration effectively sidelined calls for renewed diplomatic efforts. The message was clear: the time for talking was over, and the breakout time clock was about to strike midnight, necessitating immediate and decisive intervention to prevent a nuclear nightmare. The June 22 strikes were the product of deep coordination with Israel. For years, Israeli leaders had warned that they would never allow Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. In the months prior to the attack, there was a significant increase in high-level meetings between American and Israeli military and intelligence officials. Israeli intelligence is believed to have played a pivotal role in shaping the timing and targeting of the operation. Reports suggest that Mossad provided the United States with critical data that pinpointed vulnerabilities in the defenses. This intelligence sharing ensured that the strikes would be as effective as possible. Public statements from Israeli officials revealed a unified front with Washington. The Israeli government immediately voiced its unequivocal support for the American action, describing it as a brave and necessary decision to protect global security. By acting in concert with Israel, the White House could argue that the operation was not an impulsive move, but a carefully planned response to a shared existential danger. The American military operation was a focused surgical strike aimed at the heart of Iran's nuclear program. The Pentagon selected three primary targets. The first was the Fordow fuel enrichment plant, Iran's most heavily fortified nuclear site. The second target was the Natanz nuclear facility, the main hub of Iran's uranium enrichment program. The third target was the Isfahan Nuclear Technology Center, crucial for the earlier stages of the nuclear fuel cycle. This three-pronged approach was designed to be comprehensive, targeting not just the final enrichment process but also the foundational stages. The selection of these specific targets shows a clear strategic objective: to degrade the Iranian nuclear program. To strike the deeply buried Fordow facility, the U.S. deployed advanced weapons. The GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, or MOP, carried by B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, could burrow through reinforced concrete before detonating. For Natanz and Isfahan, the U.S. Navy employed Tomahawk land attack missiles. Launched from submarines and ships, these cruise missiles struck pre-programmed targets. The B-2s and bunker busters were the brute force, while Tomahawks offered surgical precision. This layered approach increased the probability of success while managing escalation risks. The operation demonstrated the U.S. capability to reach any target worldwide with overwhelming force. The June 22 strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities remarkably lacked immediate casualties. The White House emphasized the operation targeted infrastructure, not personnel, timed for minimal staffing. This strategic choice aimed to mitigate human cost and offer Iran an off-ramp to avoid retaliation. By avoiding deaths, the administration framed it as counter-proliferation, not war. While Iranian media condemned the strikes, officials didn't mention deaths, only injuries to security and responders. This tacit confirmation suggests both sides had reasons to keep the initial toll low. The goal: cripple the nuclear program without mass casualties. Despite careful planning, the situation remains volatile, and the narrative of a clean strike is fraying. In the aftermath of the strikes, the Trump administration projected overwhelming success, framing the operation as a decisive blow that had neutralized Iran's nuclear threats. In a televised address, President Trump declared the mission a complete victory, stating that the targeted facilities had been obliterated by American firepower. The narrative was that bunker-buster bombs and Tomahawk missiles had performed flawlessly, destroying critical infrastructure and setting back Iran's nuclear ambitions. The political purpose was to rally domestic support behind the president and warn international adversaries, demonstrating the power of the United States military. However, this confident portrayal was a one-sided account. Military assessments are often incomplete, and the true extent of the damage can be difficult to ascertain. The reality on the ground would soon prove to be far more complex than the triumphant narrative being broadcast from the White House. While Washington celebrated, a contrasting picture emerged from international observers. The IAEA suggested that while damage was sustained, the core of Iran's program remained intact. They believed Iran had relocated sensitive materials weeks before the strike, anticipating an attack. Satellite imagery confirmed damage was confined to above-ground support buildings. The main fuel enrichment plant, housed underground, appeared to have survived. Iranian officials began their own counter-narrative, releasing footage of defiant workers vowing to rebuild. This messaging aimed to project resilience and minimize the perception of a devastating blow. The strikes on Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan meant that a portion of Iran's nuclear infrastructure was never targeted and remains operational. The Iranian program is a distributed network of research centers, mining operations, and power reactors. A key facility that was spared is the Bushehr nuclear power plant. Also untouched was the Arak heavy water production plant, essential for a potential plutonium pathway. The most important asset is Iran's human capital, its nuclear scientists, engineers, and technicians. The strikes may have dealt a blow, but the program is far from eliminated. Iran retains a decentralized infrastructure, a supply of materials, and the expertise to continue its ambitions. The attack may have pushed the program further underground, reinforcing the regime's conviction that a nuclear deterrent guarantees survival. The American airstrikes on June 22 didn't just destroy Iranian nuclear sites, they destroyed any hope for diplomacy. Relations between the US and Iran have hit rock bottom, with Ayatollah Khamenei vowing no further talks. Years of negotiation and fragile treaties like the JCPOA are now in ruins, replaced by open hostility. Inside Iran, hardliners are emboldened, reformers silenced, and anti-American sentiment is at a peak. With diplomatic channels severed, every incident risks rapid escalation. The world now faces a dangerous vacuum, one where war, not words, fills the silence. Tehran's response was immediate and fierce. Severe revenge is coming. The IRGC declared all U.S. bases and Israel as legitimate targets, putting the region on high alert. Iran's missile arsenal and network of proxies, Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, the Houthis, are ready to strike. Retaliation is a matter of when, not if, and could take many forms: missile attacks, proxy strikes, or disruption of oil shipping. The world waits, tense, as Iran weighs its options, seeking maximum impact without triggering all-out war. Every U.S. soldier and ally in the region is now a potential target. The shadow of Iranian revenge looms, and the countdown has begun. The Middle East is now closer to regional war than it's been in decades. The U.S. surges troops and warships, Iran puts its missiles on high alert and drills for war in the Gulf. Israel and Saudi Arabia brace for attacks, while oil markets tremble at the threat to the Strait of Hormuz. The conflict threatens to spill across borders, dragging in proxies and allies and risking global economic chaos. The most likely future, a drawn-out shadow war, with proxy attacks, cyber strikes, and naval skirmishes. De-escalation seems impossible. The path to wider war grows clearer by the day. The world holds its breath, watching for the next spark. The June 22 strikes have unleashed a crisis with no end in sight. Iran's most direct option is a missile barrage targeting U.S. bases and Israel to send a message. Al Udeid Air Base, American outposts in Iraq, and Israeli cities are all within range. But Iran's leaders know a massive strike risks devastating retaliation, so a limited symbolic attack is more likely. The goal: restore deterrence, satisfy calls for revenge, but avoid all-out war. Missile defenses like Iron Dome and Patriot batteries are on high alert. The world watches the skies, waiting to see if this conflict will explode. Iran's true power lies in asymmetric warfare using proxies to strike from the shadows. Hezbollah could unleash rockets on Israel militias in Iraq, and Syria threaten U.S. troops. Attacks on oil tankers or U.S. naval vessels in the Gulf could disrupt global markets. This strategy lets Iran bleed its enemies, control escalation, and avoid direct confrontation. The U.S. and its allies now face a multi-front, unpredictable conflict. Retaliation will come in waves, surprise attacks, sabotage, and cyber warfare. The region braces for a long, shadowy war with no easy answers. Iran is expected to leverage its increasingly sophisticated capabilities on the digital realm of cyberspace and the global economic system. For years, Iran has been building a formidable cyber army, viewing it as a powerful asymmetric tool. A retaliatory cyber campaign could target American and Western infrastructure, including financial institutions and power grids. The goal would be to cause widespread disruption and economic damage. Its influence over the Strait of Hormuz gives it a chokehold on about a third of the world's seaborne oil supply. A sustained period of instability in the Gulf would directly impact the wallets of consumers worldwide. By expanding the conflict into these new domains, Iran can create a multifaceted crisis that is difficult for the United States to contain. This allows Iran to retaliate on its own terms. The bombing of Iran's nuclear sites ignited a fierce debate within the United States. It pitted the White House's justification for the attack against accusations that President Trump had illegally initiated a war without congressional approval. The administration argued the strikes were a necessary and defensive military action due to Iran's imminent nuclear breakout capability, posing a direct threat to U.S. national security. Critics, like Senator Bernie Sanders, rejected this, arguing that the Constitution grants Congress the power to declare war. Launching missiles against another nation is an act of war, regardless of terminology. They warned of a dangerous precedent, eroding congressional authority, and granting the president unchecked power for future military actions. The debate over the legality of the Iran strikes involves the history of presidential military actions. Proponents point out that Congress hasn't formally declared war since 1942, yet presidents have ordered military strikes. This has established a precedent. A key part of the legal defense is the AUMF, passed after 9/11s. Past administrations have interpreted them expansively to justify actions against terror groups. Critics argue relying on these precedents and AUMFs is an abuse of the system. The legality of the Iran strikes remains a contentious constitutional question, but the precedent has been set, and President Trump was within his rights despite the incorrect words of leftists like Bernie Sanders. The pre-dawn strikes of June 22, 2025, have irrevocably altered the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, plunging the United States and Iran into a direct and perilous confrontation. President Trump's decision to bomb the nuclear facilities at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan was a monumental gamble, intended to neutralize Iran's atomic ambitions. Yet, as the dust settles, the outcome is far from the obliterated victory declared by the White House. The operation has delivered a significant setback to the Iranian program, destroying key infrastructure and halting enrichment activities. However, it has failed to eliminate the core of Iran's capabilities, leaving underground components damaged but not destroyed, and its vast intellectual capital entirely intact. The war against Iran's nuclear program is far from over. It has merely been driven deeper into the shadows. This military action has shattered the fragile framework of international diplomacy, replacing negotiations with the certainty of open hostility. The path for dialogue has been closed, perhaps for a generation, empowering hardliners in Tehran who now see confrontation as their only path forward. Iran's vow of severe revenge is not a hollow threat, but a promise of sustained retaliation. We can expect dangerous escalation in the shadow war, with missile strikes, proxy attacks on U.S. troops and allies like Israel, disruptive cyber warfare against Western infrastructure, and naval skirmishes in the Persian Gulf. The region is now a tinderbox, braced for conflict that could spiral out of control. At home, the strikes have ignited a constitutional crisis, reopening debate over presidential war authority. The clash between the president's power as commander-in-chief and Congress's authority to declare war highlights fundamental tension in American democracy. This battle will rage in Washington, but the consequences are already unfolding. The world now faces a new and unstable era, defined not by pursuit of peace, but by management of escalating conflict. The crisis is no longer about preventing Iran from getting a bomb, but about preventing regional war with catastrophic global consequences. The legacy of June 22nd remains unwritten. Will Iran's retaliation trigger devastating war, or will both sides pull back from the brink? Has this made America safer or unleashed a new cycle of violence? The road ahead is fraught with uncertainty. The strikes intended to answer the Iranian nuclear question have left the world with more dangerous questions than ever. The conflict has just begun and its final cost is yet to be counted. Thank you for watching History Icebreakers.